Hello, welcome, hello. Welcome to those watching at home. Wow, you're much closer than usual, aren't you? Maybe I should back this up. I think furniture got rearranged in here. There we go. There. We started, wow, static electricity. We're starting something new today. So before Easter, we finished up. Well, what were we even talking about? We got through the book and then we did Philippians, that's right. And had some really good conversations through the course of that. And tried a little practical application at the end with some kind of scenarios to test it on. I think it went all right. And I'm gonna be using that joy detective thing a little bit with the children's sermon today. I'm gonna give them little notebooks and tell them to go look for God sightings and where they've seen God. So I hope you keep that up. I think that's something I'm gonna try to keep doing too, is tapping into that joy and saying, what's God trying to teach me with that joy? I don't think it's too far a departure what we're gonna do now. Where we had left things was, well, let's talk about maybe something from our Lutheran heritage. And through a conversation I had this past Tuesday, all the Richmond Conference pastors, retired pastors, clergy got together for a meeting. The Synod staff was going around the state, checking in everywhere. And we had a conversation over one of the discussion questions that we had, and Pastor Philip Martin from Epiphany said something that just got me thinking. And what he talked about was, one of the questions was, what are maybe some fears in the congregation or in the church right now, just in general. And that conversation led to, are we relevant anymore as a church? What are we doing? And part of the conversation was, well, we don't have the institutions anymore, right? Churches used to build schools, build hospitals, like we were part of the infrastructure. And over time, that's shifted. Churches aren't going around building hospitals anymore. In some other parts of the world, the church is still doing those things. They're trying to minister to people's body and soul. But in our society, that's not so much the case anymore. Churches still do a lot of outreach. We have food pantries, we do, all sorts of things. But we're not in the institution business like we were, obviously. And so he was talking about that. And I said, well, maybe that's an opportunity. Maybe that was so easy, right? It's like, well, we build all the things, people are going to come to church, right? Church is everywhere. So maybe there's an opportunity here to get out into the world with our gospel message in a little different way. And so what came to mind for me is what I want to have our conversation on during this Easter season, and that is the Lutheran understanding of vocation. Okay, so not that other denominations don't talk about it, but Luther talked about vocation a bit and talked about it in some particular ways. So before we get into it, what do you hear, or what comes to mind for you when you hear the word vocation?
It's related to the church or just the word?
Just in general.
Occupation, work, yeah.
Occupation, work, job, anything else?
The place of life, it can be as a father or as a mother,
Okay,
that's a vocation.
Sense of self-worth.
okay, sure. Yeah, all those things. Luther goes a little farther, and in good Lutheran fashion, it started as because he was mad about something.
That sounds like it.
I don't see that about that.
Or maybe perturbed or annoyed, but he was frustrated about something, and part of the Reformation wasn't just the indulgences, wasn't just the overreach of the Pope and doing things like that. Part of his issue was to do with monasteries and convents. And so part of the beginning of the Lutheran understanding of vocation was rooted in Luther speaking against elevating monastic orders over regular people. So I'm going to share with you a couple of quotes from the Book of Concord. This is, the Lutheran handbook, really. This is the early writings of Luther and other reformers that established the core of Lutheran theology. But a lot of it was written in the terms of, and this is why we're not like the Catholics, or this is why we're not like the Baptists. So part of what we're going to talk about too is, okay, well, we know why, what, that he was saying, I want to talk about this because of what it isn't. And I want to shift that by the end of our week, couple of weeks on this, to claim it as something of who we are, not of something we're not, okay? Because a lot of Lutheran theology started as defining ourselves against something else, which is great for arguments and starting a new church, but not so great for sustaining, right? If you're only ever defining yourself by what you're against or who you're not, then who are you? What does that leave? Hopefully we can flip this on its head. So I want to just read a couple of excerpts. This first one is from the Augsburg Confession, or the Apology of the Augsburg Confession. So that was the list of things that the Lutheran Church stood for. The Apology was the longer explanations. Now, the way this is written, there's a German side and a Latin side. These are both in English, but the way this book is, every page in this first section is duplicated with slight translation differences. So I'm going to read both sides so you get both parts of this. I'm on the wrong page. Here we go. That makes more sense now. Now you can see the numbers maybe on the outside. That just numbers the paragraphs so you can find stuff, but you'll see they're the same on both sides because it's the same stuff. We'll see. Hopefully that focused for you at home. Okay. So we're gonna do 8 through 11 here. So this, I forget which side is which here. I think this is the German side. In the second place, such traditions have also obscured God's commands, for these traditions are placed far above God's commands. This alone was considered the Christian life. Whoever observed festivals this way, prayed in this way, fasted in this way, and was dressed in this way, was said to live a spiritual Christian life. So in other words, if you gave your life to the monastic orders, nuns and monks, then you were living a holy life. You were above everybody else. On the other hand, other necessary good works were considered secular, unspiritual ways of life, that each person is obliged to act according to his or her calling. For example, that the father of a family works to support his wife and children and raises them in the fear of God, and the mother of a family bears children and looks after them, that a prince or rulers govern a country, etc. Such works commanded by God had to be a secular and imperfect way of life, while the traditions had to have impressive names, so that only they were called holy and perfect works. That is why there was no end or limit in the making of such traditions. I'm going to read the other one just this once, because it's slightly different enough to pick up some more nuance. In the second place, these traditions obscured the precepts of God because traditions were preferred far more than the precepts of God. All Christianity was thought to consist of the observance of certain holy days, rites, fasts, and vestments. These observances possessed the most distinguished titles because they were the spiritual life and the perfect life. Meanwhile, the commands of God pertaining to one's calling, and when you hear calling, that's the word vocation, were not praised. That the head of the household should rear the children, that a mother should bear them, that a prince should govern his country. These were considered as worldly and imperfect works, far inferior to those splendid observances. This error greatly tormented pious consciences. They grieved that they were bound to an imperfect kind of life, in marriage and government and other civil functions. They admired the monks and others like them and falsely imagined that the observances of such people were more pleasing to God. Okay? So one of the things Luther and others were lifting up in the Reformation was that these other callings, and if you think of the word vocation, vocal, right? That's that same root word to call. It wasn't only being called to some religious life. So pastors, deacons, bishops, monks, nuns, all of that. He said, he goes on to say, being a parent is a calling. Being a ruler, that would translate to our days, serving on the school board, right? Public office, or being a citizen who votes, that's a calling. Think of the commandments, honor thy father and mother. Being a child and how you treat your parents and other authority figures is a calling. being a sibling, being a spouse. um, The list goes on and on. So all of those are also holy callings, and Luther had issue that by kind of saying only these holy people were being called by God, then what does that leave everybody else? Why would you even try? Right? What's the point? And especially if it's like, well, they're holy and you're the imperfect worldly people. Like, what is that going to do to their thing? For fun, have you ever heard of this? The Lutheran Handbook. This was all the rage some years ago. This is the sequel, the Lutheran Handbook 2. It features a winking Luther on the cover. But this was just a kind of fun way to discuss Lutheran theology, in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, but still get the information.
Something just struck me, you talk about, he was saying that everybody was, unless you were holier than thou, you were not considered much. I see some parallel with Christ and the Sadducees and the, and the Pharisees. They were more stuck on the ritual and the piety than
Yeah.
what they were supposed to be on.
How many times does Jesus say, don't be like those hypocrites? Or the parables of the Pharisee, oh, I'm so glad I'm not like those people, and then, this poor tax collector, or the old woman giving the little bit she had, Jesus calls out that kind of stuff all the time. So this is from this book, How to Tell the Difference Between a Vocation and a Vacation. The illustrations in these books are great. So Martin Luther's doctrine of vocation is radical because Luther says that a holy calling is not limited to people who are pastors or missionaries. Rather, any job or career is holy when a Christian performs it as part of her or his baptismal call from God to serve others. 1. Consider the role of money in the context of the activity. If someone is paying you, however little, rather than making you pay for the opportunity to do the activity, you may be living a vocation rather than being on vacation. 2. Assess the measure and type of fatigue that results from the activity. If you are working very hard and getting very tired, but you are not exhausted or downcast, you may be living a vocation rather than being on a vacation. This is a point where vocation and vacation may overlap. Discern carefully. Number 3, check nearby tables for beverages with little umbrellas in them. If you are serving others rather than being served by others, you may be living it as a vocation rather than being on vacation. Most employers do not cater to their employees with beverage cart service to the pupils. Most, as you drink from your company coffee. Number 4, discern your impact on the people around you. If people are genuinely grateful for your presence rather than just saying so to get a bigger tip, you may be living a vocation rather than being a vacation. Number 5, measure the level of challenge you experience during the activity. If challenged at multiple levels, intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual, by what you do each day, and that definitely applies, I think, to some of the more parenting and spousal pieces, by what you do each day, you may be living a vocation rather than being on vacation. While hiking or surfing may be challenging in a physical way, hiking and surfing are probably not vocations for most people. And 6, although for some it is. I mean, some people, those runners, those hikers, and how you treat others on the trail, how you clean up after yourselves, that can be a vocation. 6, differentiate between your level of fulfillment and your level of relaxation. If you find fulfillment in what you do beyond mere relaxation and enjoyment, you may be living a vocation. Be aware, the Lutheran doctrine of vocation encompasses careers and roles outside of workplace employment. Father, mother, sister, brother, friend, and colleague are just a few of the vocations to which Christians are called. Vocations of the paid workplace variety can change. God may choose to call you into many different vocations of this kind during your lifespan, or many different types of things all at the same time. Discerning to which vocations God is calling you is among the most important and ongoing challenges you face as a Christian. And that's something I hope that we really keep with us after we get through this course, is that this isn't just a nice way of thinking. This is really central to our faith, our ethics, and our evangelism. And then the overlap region between vocation and vacation is typically called an avocation, which means a hobby or minor vocation. Avocations show many characteristics of both vocation and vacation, but they have their own name, so folks should use them. On the front, what was the caption? I love these pictures. Vacations and vocations are quite different, as one is recreational and the other is recreational. A life lived through the promises of baptism to participate in God's ongoing work of blessing. Um, so now you have a little bit of an idea what we're talking about with vocation. It's a very broad. That's what I'm looking for. Net. Broad tent, there we go, it covers a lot. Big umbrella. I would like you to take a minute to think about it, and when you feel ready to share it, I want you to share your own personal collection of vocations. So not just your job or anything, but come up with a list. What is your personal collection of vocations? You want some writing utensils? Just what do you want to share part of your collection?
The typical ones, like husband, father, son, daughter, friend. Of things. Try to find time for it, yeah.
I don't know if it's an application or vocation. That's
It's in the overlap zone.
mentoring to people. I don't know if you call that, because I enjoy doing that. But I don't know if that's a vocation or application, because it can be both.
I would definitely include that in the collection. Yeah, that has a big impact.
Vocation.
Definitely. Um, and for some folks, it's being aunt or uncle or sibling. Some folks are thrust into roles they didn't think they were gonna get, like the older sibling has to take care of the younger one. Grandparent who decides to adopt the grandchild to raise them.
I used to think when I was in nursing, when I was new there, that it couldn't be, why didn't we use the word vocation? But it couldn't be a vocation because I was paid for it, so it didn't count if you got paid. And, I guess that's not true, I'm not sure yet, but.
No, I mean, especially in any kind of field where you're being a caregiver, even if you're getting paid, there's a quote from somebody who was writing about Luther. Luther said something about, God doesn't need your good works. And this person took it a step farther and said, God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does. So whether you're getting paid for it or not, there's another quote attributed to Luther that says, what makes a shoemaker a Christian shoemaker? It's not that he puts little crosses on his shoes. It's that he does a quality job, sells something that's gonna actually be a good product and doesn't gouge people. So even if you're getting paid, you can still, that can still be a calling that you're living out.
I think it has something to do with the quality that you do it at. In other words, that you feel like, do you like going to work? Do you like your profession? Is it something you just do drudgery that you're just doing just to make a buck? I think.
But even then, you can still do it well with regard for others.
But I'm from experience, I know people that just, they just put their time in. They don't do anything above and beyond what they think they gotta do. That's not a vocation. That's just basically trying to make a dollar.
And so how would that affect both the person working and their coworkers and customers if,
Makes it happen.
even if you're saying, I'm only doing this because I need the money, I hate this job, this is drudgery, I'm just punching in and punching out, and it even makes me a little miserable. However, I'm going to be interacting with other of God's children, so how can I still do this thing that I dislike in a way that I feels like a calling, or still live out my baptismal calling and promises, even in this situation I don't want to be.
Well, I think one of the things it does is be a Debbie Downer all the time, so where everybody else is. So
Sure.
that's not really a vocation at that point, I don't think.
Yeah,
It's just a job.
yeah. Yeah, so then, you know, that might be a thing to consider, is how do you encourage others around you or yourself? You can still complain. I don't think there's anything,
Oh, no.
I mean, that's natural. But can you still? How is it possible? How can you still live it out as calling, even when it's just a job?
When you, like, there's something what you would like to see.
Sure. Oh, yeah,
I
that's
think
a.
you could do it still, sometimes complain, we sort clothes on Friday. We do complain about that person who sends in the heavy winter coat in,
That's
you know, in
sure.
summer, or who sends us the ragged, dirty clothes and so, you know, so we do some complaining, but we still have, we do a service.
Yeah, it's basically the attitude defines whether it's a job or a vocation.
Which does connect us to our conversations from Philippians. And what is your attitude? Are you tapping into that joy, to that contentedness, to that peace? That's gonna change how you operate. And you, like you said, you're still providing a service. Maybe that person didn't even know what to do or had no other way to get rid of those dirty, ragged clothes. But either way, you're providing a service to help them declutter and get it out.
Well, we give everything we can't use, we give to those boxes outside the schools, and the schools get money from it.
There you go.
You know, that, you talk about the stuff that people give, and they may be feeling that they're doing something they, because they could have just thrown it away, you know, I mean, they did, so they think they're doing something to help society too, so.
Even if they're off the
Even
mark.
if it's not, that they may be in bad shape themselves and they don't really have anything, they're still trying to give something, they could have just thrown it in the garbage can.
Mhm.
But they didn't, so they had an alternative motive for giving it, even whether it was not any good, so you can look at it that way, so.
Well,
You know,
this
my
side,
glass is half full, not half empty, but you know.
this side of the table has shared some of their collections. Anything from this half? Any other roles that maybe haven't been brought up yet, or something that's unique to you?
I felt a true calling to going into office work, because I worked with kids and adolescents for so long, so I feel it's a vocation. I mean, and I felt a calling at that time too, but I felt a different later in life, taking a different direction, working in that avenue. And I definitely feel it's a vocation.
Some vocations I think are easier to discern if you're working as hospice, or as a nurse, or caregiver, teacher. Okay, yeah, I'm directly doing something with somebody else for somebody else. And I think the challenge is, like Roger brought up, those drudge jobs, you know, the stuff that you're only doing just to survive or to get a paycheck. Is there a way to still see that as a calling, even if it's not as, on the nose, some of these other ones?
I think the definition is whether or not it's a vocation or just a job, it's your attitude towards it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're doing the job, and, I make the best of what I got, and try to see the best in all of it, because I can't see, personally, I've been around like a long time. And I'd have a hard time seeing how people could survive if all the things, every time they went out, it's all negative,
Mhm.
because it'd be a hell of a road to hoe, I think.
I was just watching this. This is a tangent, but I think I'll tie it back around. I've been watching a show called The Last of Us. It's kind of an apocalypse show. It's based on a video game. It's not zombies, but it's it might as well be. It's fungus that took over people and hijacked their brains. They kind of act
Odd people.
a little bit. The episode I just watched had a community of Christians, and guess what? They were hypocrites and they were terrible. Like, it's so easy to do that in pop culture. Right, but I want to think that maybe it's because if Christians actually, on the whole, especially the public ones, practiced what we preached, if we lived up to our ideals and standards, I think people actually would like that. And so maybe it's a subconscious thing to knock on the ones that are hypocrites, because it's a betrayal of the gospel we have to share in some ways.
It makes them feel better if they can knock on something that's supposed to be.
Well, that's
blessed,
it,
so.
that's it. But if we're, and this is something we're gonna talk about in a couple of weeks, but if we're kind of living in what some scholars call post-Christendom, which means you can't just assume Christianity anymore, right? It's not, like I said, it's not the institution in the same way. Then how do we get the gospel message out? I think for a long time, we just assumed as a culture and as a church, like, oh, well, yeah, we're Christians, everybody knows Christians. Yeah, exactly. But it hasn't been for a while now. And I think vocation, the attitude, the tapping into that Philippian stuff might be a way to share the good news in personal, everyday, sincere ways, in a way that could be much more impactful than just assuming that everybody's gonna come to church on Sunday and, we're done. So
I think so much that you talk about, people going to just being as a job, I think it comes across that, vocation versus feeling it's just a job, there's attitudes and that negative, it comes across in how you interact with people.
Yeah, big time.
I think with how, you see it as a vocation and you're there for a purpose, but in how you interact with your colleagues, the other clients that you're working with, the customers, your team, your supervisors, I think so much that is how that comes out, that Christian,
Yeah.
calling piece versus not feeling like it's just a job.
Yeah, just
And I
being,
think you see that comes across when interacting with other people, even though you're trying hard, you may not think you're displaying that attitude of this is just a job, but people know, and you can feel that.
One of the criticisms against what Luther was saying was that it could be used to say, so if you're a peasant, stay a peasant, just be happy, right? So, it's one thing to say, bear a cross, but that doesn't mean you're a Christian doormat either. So if you have a bad boss or a coworker or a bad situation, go ahead.
Well, that's Confucianism,
Yeah,
the whole,
yeah,
you're a
You're locked
peasant,
in,
you should
yeah.
try and be the best peasant you
Right.
possibly can,
Right.
but you shouldn't try to.
Yeah,
There's
don't-
also a system of control.
exactly. So what this is saying is, as we said, your vocation can shift, you can change, you can have multiple things. But whatever you're doing, if you're saying, I'm a baptized child of God, how can I live out my baptism in whatever situation I'm in? Like Paul said, I'm content in whatever situation I'm in. That doesn't mean if something's wrong, you don't say this is wrong. But it does mean maybe it's an attitude thing, not a Pollyanna thing, I'm not gonna.
ironically, in my case, it started out as a survival technique.
Oh, yeah,
And it then became part of my modus of operation.
Yeah.
Because but it started out as a survival technique, because I always use the term, life's a bummer and then you die.
Guessing that wasn't the
No,
exact.
that's not exactly that. Clean it up, but I mean, if you go through life that way, then it's a real bummer. So you try to mentally and purposely try to find good in what you're doing, even if you can't find it, if you try. And eventually it works and you'll find it much quicker after a while.
Yeah, that's like when Jesus says, where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. Sometimes you have to start putting the treasure where you want your heart to eventually get to. Treasure in the broadest sense. That could include your attitude.
When one day, some time ago, I asked my daughter why she did not continue going to church and why she didn't raise her kids in the church. And she said, well, I still believe everything I used to believe, but she said, I watched you all these years work in the chair in the church and heard all that arguing, all that pettiness that comes from the church. And she said, I have learned that in teaching, I don't need to do that. And that has struck me often. Maybe she was looking for an excuse not to go, but there's some truth in that.
That's another whole constellation of callings and vocations. Is what you do within this community. You know, the things you sign up for, what you do, how you treat one another. You know, if there's conflict, that's okay. But how do you handle it in a healthy way, in a way that eventually builds the body of Christ? And if it just is pettiness, then yeah, that's going to leave an impression. I've heard some horror stories. I'm sure you all have too. And we live them.
I think you find what you look for. Some people,
Sometimes.
sometimes people find it easier to look for the bad in things than the good in things. And everything has some good and everything has some bad.
Mhm.
You just don't dwell on the negative.
Or how do you handle the negative in a way that's still part of your calling? Maybe the negative is something that's worth changing or challenging. But if all you ever do is just complain about it and never change it, then that's not.
I don't think you should complain about something unless you're willing to be part of the solution.
Yeah, Liz often tells the story about something her mom told her. And it was basically, you know, if you don't go vote, then you don't get to complain.
I used to work at Babcock and Wilcox, the ones that built 3 Mile Island.
Okay,
This-
like the power plant? with the-
Yeah.
Okay,
But they also did other things, but
Yeah.
and they had a receptionist there, that every time I would come in. And she had never complained.
Mhm.
She never had a good word to say about anything. And one day she was ranting and raving about some politics and I made a comment, well, I don't normally do that, but in this case, she kind of taken me off a bit. And I said, well, who'd you vote for this last time around? And she said, well, I don't vote. And I looked at her and I says, you know, if they went and burned your house down, killed your husband, raped you and took your kids back in, you wouldn't have a leg to stand on because you never tried to do anything about it. The woman never talked to me ever after that. So, in politics anyway, she never talked politics.
you kind of shut that one down.
But I was a little more brass when I was younger.
None of your stories giving me. Okay. Let me share a little more Luther, and then I've got one more thing to do. This is kind of variations on the theme, but I think it just sets up kind of my next question here. This is also from the Augsburg Confession. This is the Latin side this time. Furthermore, the precepts of God and true worship of God are obscured when people hear that only monks are in a state of perfection. For Christian perfection means earnestly to fear God and at the same time to have great faith and to trust that we have a gracious God on account of Christ, to ask for and to expect with certainty help from God in all things that are to be borne in connection with our calling. In other words, if you see the different roles you play in life and the different things you're doing as part of your calling, as a Christian, as a baptized, named and claimed, loved child of God, then in the midst of that, you ask for and expect with certainty help from them. It is an attitude. It is a, maybe, fake it till you make it thing, like we talked about a few weeks ago. And in the meantime, diligently to do good works for others and to serve in our calling. No matter what you're doing, you have an opportunity to do something good for somebody else, for creation, to God's glory. True perfection and true worship of God consist in all these things, not in, and this is the monks and nuns, celibacy, mendicancy, so like asking for alms and stuff, or shabby clothing. Right? On that account, the people form many pernicious opinions from such false commendations of monastic life. They hear celibacy praised without restraint, and so they live in marriage with a troubled conscience. They hear that only mendicants are perfect, taking a vow of poverty, and so they keep their possessions or engaged in business with a troubled conscience. They hear that it is an evangelical counsel not to take revenge, and so some are not afraid to take vengeance in their private lives, since they are told that this is prohibited by a council and not a precept. Well, if that's just a monk thing, doesn't matter if I do it or not. Others err still more, for they judge and that all magistracy and all civil offices are unworthy of Christians and in conflict with the gospel. Okay. Last one. So like I said, it started as don't be like those monks, don't give them all the credit. But if you flip it, there's something really powerful in this to say that God is at work in you, in your callings, in all circumstances. We have a chance to live out our promises, to do good works, to be a Christian, and that we can call on God in anything, not just those people who took the special holy path. That's powerful.
Well, I mean, it's just like when you said it takes all parts to make a body, so it is because you're not priest or monk or in that period of time, doesn't make you less of a life.
Yeah.
You still got your position and you're part of that overall conglomerate to make it work.
Yeah, and Luther was a monk for a while. And I'm not trying to knock monks and nuns. I've had really amazing experiences from the writings of monks and nuns, from visiting convents and monasteries and abbeys. There is a calling to what they do, but to elevate it above anything else
That's right.
was the issue for Luther. Okay, the last one. Let's see, if our opponents could produce such passages about celibacy, he's on celibacy again. He got married and had kids. So, they indeed could stage a wonderful victory celebration. Paul says that a woman is saved through childbearing. In contrast to the hypocrisy of celibacy, what greater honor could he bestow than to say that woman is saved by the conjugal functions themselves, by conjugal intercourse, by childbirth, or by her other domestic duties? By what does Paul mean? Let the reader observe that faith is added, and that the domestic duties are not praised apart from faith. For he is speaking about the entire class of mothers. Therefore, he especially requires faith by which a woman receives forgiveness of sins and justification. Okay, now we're getting into some like historical stuff that maybe you take issue with now. But the point to pull out of this is, think of that time and place. What were women good for? His wife was an exception. There were exceptions in the world. You get tastes of it if you get into like music history, literature, some family histories. But the main place in this society for the woman was you have the kids. You get married, you have the kids, you take care of the kids. And he's saying, even if we don't agree with that system anymore, the point that he's making is that's no less holy than what a monastery is.
Good.
So every calling, every role you play has the opportunity to be lived as a call. Okay, I did one other handout. There was an article in, it used to be called The Lutheran, now they call it Living Lutheran. It was a magazine. It's pretty much all just online articles now. But I found one from 2020 that's all about what we're talking about. So some of this is not going to be reviewed, but I want to kind of cover this. I'm going to be taking pieces of this article out over the next couple of weeks. But maybe we can read this together, and then we'll have one last kind of time for reflection. And for the folks at home, I will do my best. I can't in good conscience post this one for copyright reasons. This is just a handout, but the article is online, so I'll post the link along with the video. Did I pass that out? Okay. Let's just do this in sections. So if somebody could do, what shall I do with my life? And then somebody else wants to jump in on Luther on vocation. And then we'll have some discussion at the end of that.
Shall I do with my life? Question puzzles us as youngsters when we hear about meeting adults ask, who do you want to be when you grow up? It riddles us as students and teachers inquire about post-graduation plans. Presses on us as adulthood when we can work volunteer opportunities for football further schooling. We face it again when our jobs end and our children move out, our loved ones depart, or our living arrangements. The Christian answer to the question, what shall I do with my life? Asserts Dorothy C. Bass is vocation. In other words, respond to God's call. Bass, a Lutheran author who studied vocation and other associated topics alongside her husband, Luther academic Mark Schwinn, while updating their anthology Leading Lives That Matter for publication of a second edition this June. Though student input guided the first edition, Schwinn said vocational discernment isn't just for young people. Vocation has to do with the shape and meaning of a human life, he said. So long as you're alive and functioning, you have multiple callings, such as grandparent, parishioner, or citizen. It's very Lutheran to think you multiply station places of responsibility.
You guys want to pick up from there, or any comments, thoughts, questions on that? Yeah, cover what we talked about. Who wants to do the other part? You.
In Martin Luther's day, the general public believed that those called to ministry were more noble than the common person. The words vocatio were reserved for spiritual occupations, such as being a priest or a nun, said Timothy Winger, professor emeritus of Reformation history at the United Youth Lutheran Seminary. What's revolutionary about Luther's theology is that he believed God calls everyone to serve, like Winger noted. Vocation gives our lives purpose from childhood through older adulthood. He understands that we are called through our baptism. He also insists that we are called into this world to serve our neighbors. He said, Luther understood the calling of God to include absolutely everything we do in life. Vocation includes both our daily rhythm or livelihood and our responsibility as they relate to others. Luther was especially interested in familial relationships. Very active changing diapers, he declared, is living out one's parental vocation. Any kind of honorable work, any daily activity becomes an expression of vocation, said Michael Benetham, author of Listen, God's Calling, author and director of Evangelical Mission in the Northeastern Pennsylvania Synod. For a child, that calling might be schoolwork. For a homemaker, it's keeping at home. For an artist, it's using your gifts or talents to create good products for the benefit of the customers. What's key for Luther is living in the sense of Christian love and intentionality, he added. Martin Luther King Jr. echoed such notions in the 1967 address to students of Philadelphia. When you discover what you're going to do in life, set out to do it as if God Almighty called you at this particular moment in history to do it. If it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Leontine Price sings before the Metropolitan Opera. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the host of heavens and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well. Even work that society deems lowly is honorable in God's eyes, insofar as it contributes to the well-being of our neighbors. Luther's teaching on vocation brings dignity to our daily lives. One criticism of Luther's stance on vocation is that it suggests menial laborers should be content with their station in life. Benetham said that this is a misunderstanding. People suggest Luther was trying to keep the servant class down. Luther was for social mobility. What he was saying is that if you may stay in your social role and position you're in, he was acting over and against a religious culture that said the only way to lead a holy life was to enter ministry. Every moment can be holy when you live your life days. Every moment can be holy when you live your days.
Thank you. So taking that last line, I gotta look at it. Every moment can be holy when you live your days attuned to God's call. Think back to your collection of vocations. I want you to pick one of them. And what role does your faith play in it? Or could it play in it if you haven't put those together before? So how can each one of your vocations be holy and attuned to God's call? So pick one.
But I don't think necessarily an active. You're not actively engaging your faith in one of those positions. It's just doing it, what you're doing is the best of your ability. As I said here, the great street sweeper who does this job well, right?
Yeah.
Here lives the father who changed diapers so well that it was the greatest diaper change forever, right? I mean, it's,
Yeah,
you're not so much act like, we don't have any jealous eyes to our coworkers at work to be a Christian
Right.
at work.
right. But how is your faith doing what you just said? How is it informing what you're doing and how you're doing it? Not necessarily saying like, I'm changing this diaper as an act of my faith.
Right.
Look at me, yeah.
But have you ever stopped to reflect on how your faith could shape how you do film?
I don't think I've thought about it. I know I've shared before that I had a mother at one time who was very anti-public school. And yet, when I lived here, there was and all the private religious schools were full at the time, and she had to send her child to public school, which just frightened her to death. And at the end of the year, she paid me a very good compliment. She said, I proved that what she'd been told was wrong, that she'd been told there were no Christians in public schools. And I don't, as a public school teacher, I did not teach Christianity. I did not
Right.
work my faith out there. But I think by the way you treat others and what you do, it comes through.
You can model it.
You gotta come across the table, and I don't say this is trying to, you have to look, you have to come across it, and I'm not saying you have to look that way to make a point, but you gotta be genuine, not do it for the sake of just making everybody think you're a great guy.
Right, and if you come across like, oh, let me help you with that.
Yeah,
Anybody looking, and like that's that's our Ash Wednesday reading, like, don't be like the hypocrites who only do these things to get attention for it. You already got your.
And I think it comes across, if you are definitely genuine, it can be seen.
Yeah.
People can see through all that wool, so.
One of our teachers in seminary taught ethics, told the story about how when he was a pastor before he started teaching, I think he was in Missouri somewhere, like on the Mississippi River, so there was, gambling stuff on the river. Some kind of riverboat or something. And there was something on the city docket, county docket to expand or build a new one or something like that. And so he went to the meeting to speak against it because he was already ministering to people who were suffering from gambling addictions or lost a lot of money. He didn't think it would be a benefit to that particular context. And he said, so he went to speak against it, but he did not go with his collar. He did not go, dressed because, he said, for this particular set of circumstances, I was living out my vocation as a citizen. And I wanted it to come across as a concerned citizen and not try to be like, well, look at me, I have the official garb on. That would come across differently. So in that situation, he said, he went as a citizen, not as his pastoral vocation. Because he didn't want it to come across, he didn't want to distract people from the point he was trying.
So one thing I could be criticizing it because Luther was trying to keep the peasant down or like what it should be place. I disagree with that wholeheartedly.
Oh, yeah.
Because anybody that does their job well, if you do your job as your vocation, you are going to rise in life. And even in Luther's day, if you were doing your job the best of any position, people would notice that you would rise, maybe not, you would be the king,
Right.
but you would rise in the level of the peasantry, if you will. Like,
Sure.
you would do well, and people have always recognized that throughout history, the people that do their job well, if you have the right job, the right calling, and you do it like it's a calling, you're going to have upward
Yeah.
mobility, per se.
Yeah, or you'll at least be noticed
Mhm.
and appreciated. And I want to expand on that. It's more than just the job, because that was the first thing that most people think of, vocation. What isn't it like? Like in school, don't you have like vocational
Okay.
surveys and things like that? And vocational office is the one that helps you.
Okay.
You connect it with jobs. So I want everybody to think the diaper change. Somebody cut me off. Maybe I won't flip them off today. Like this, like whatever it is. There's everything you're doing in life is an opportunity to live vocationally, to live out a calling through your life.
Mike Rowe made a comment one time, I read something, someone said that
This
The
is the
most-
guy from Dirty
right,
Jobs.
yeah. the most satisfied and happy people did some of the most menial jobs. But they did them well, but he said, it was one of his revelations was the fact that you could be digging out a sewer, right? And he said they were still, as far as their attitude and everything was concerned, compared to people he knew that was in the academia or in business,
Sure.
they were the most happiest people he ever came across.
Yes.
And so, there has something to be said about that, you know, in that point, you don't, just because you make a lot of money and you're working in an office cubicle or something like that, which I couldn't do, but let's say you were,
Sure.
and you're doing it for the buck, they're the most unhappiest people around.
Sometimes.
So, in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and so to put that together with what Darren was saying, you know. It's not necessarily that you're gonna get all the promotions and all the corner offices or, you know, G6, you know, jet. But it will be noticed and it will be appreciated, and you might get the promotion, you might get something, but that's not going to be that, right? Otherwise, it comes back to what you were saying before, of you're doing it just to get noticed or.
You're doing it for the wrong reason.
Right. So this, I think this grows out of what we talked about in Philippians, like I said, is there joy? You know, is there. There's a well of goodness from God to support you in all that you do. And so when Paul says, in all circumstances, I've learned to be content, he doesn't mean I just, you know, well, whatever, guess, not much, you know, he's not Eeyore, right? Not much else I can do. It means that you come at it by tapping into this well of goodness and peace and grace of God. And say, everything in this life is an opportunity for me to live out the calling that God has given me.
It's like when I retired at 62, retirement to me was not the most weird thing retirement is, it was changing occupations.
Yeah, it's retirement vocation.
Yeah,
Sure.
it was changing occupation, so you had to look at life in a different way than you did when you were working full time, because all the priorities changed, but it's still a vocation, it's still. There's still something there that's worthwhile to do,
Definitely.
so,
And how many people think that they're, all right, like they're so tied up with their occupational vocation. That if that goes away, then they lose that sense
Yeah.
of worth, yeah.
but it is a change of profession.
Yeah.
A change of occupation.
It's really easy to just look at somebody who has retired and say, you know,
You
well,
just-
they're just retired now.
Yeah. It doesn't
And
work.
not to think of what gifts are they bringing, what stories, what experiences, to look at a kid and do the same thing, well, they don't know anything. That's, this, if you think vocationally for yourself, but for everybody else, that each one of these people is also somebody who's a child of God trying to live their life. This is a game changer. That maybe this, you know, maybe talking about vocation or calling, or whatever we want to say it, or just having this in your heart as you go through life. Like I said, maybe this gets us away from the church needing to build hospitals.
We're built that way. I'm saying we're built to have a reason to live.
Yeah.
We're built to have a cause, because if you just shut down, if you retire and you sit in the front porch and you go fishing every day, I give you 10 years in lots of cases, and I see that in where I'm working. I'll have people come in that are my age or younger, and they've turned off after they've retired, and they're emaciating, they're falling apart.
That
There's no
happens,
reason to live.
that I've met retired clergy who they were so tied up in this is who I am. Only who I am. That they're lost, and sometimes that can play out in not so healthy ways, because you still are trying to do something, even if that interferes with somebody else. Somebody was about to say something.
I was gonna say, I think this would, I don't know about with your kids at school, but I feel like there's been such pressure put on like trying to job that fun. I feel like this is a good lesson with the kids, the teens, because I know we hear it so much from Max, he's only in 8th grade, he's like, they're always asking, what do you wanna do when you grow up? What do you wanna be? I'm like, what do you feel that you would be good at? I feel like it's such a hard, I feel like, and Wesley came from Friday with a career kind of thing. What do you like? What would you be good at? I'm like, I feel like there's so much
Yeah.
pressure put on trying to find that job, that
Trying to pick the college you go to based on the career.
Right.
What if you don't know?
Right, you don't know, or you don't, things change in life too. I feel like it's a good.
So they're senior in college anyway.
Well, exactly. A good lesson of, really kind of dig a little bit deeper, than it's not just a job, it's what do you feel? What do you, and I don't know, I think it's a good, I was just telling you, Max is always like, you feel like there's so much pressure already, just going, because they had to apply for high school programs based off of what they might wanna do as an adult.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of.
And you will know what
No.
happens, that's what you want to do.
Well,
It's-
and that's,
Or you pick one and quickly realize.
and
this
you're like,
isn't
that's
it.
not, yeah, exactly, I think we've all done that, you go one route and you're like, okay, whoops, you get into the core class, ooh, no.
I'd like to know. I'd love to know if there's a study out there somewhere and find out the college degrees, how many are still working in that particular degree?
Probably
And it's
not.
probably very little.
I will say one of the main moments of my, I can call it a call story, like, when you get to seminary, everybody's like, oh, how did you get, what was your call story? Like, what led you into the ministry? And one of the big moments of mine was this hugely anticlimactic moment. I was an English major, among other things, and I'm in this senior seminar on satire. I love satire. Satire is great, but I'm reading a book not of satire, but about satire. Like, this is why it works. I'm sitting there in the library in my little study carrel reading this book, and I at that point I was like, I'm either gonna go on and be an English teacher, because I had amazing English professors that just blew my mind, and I wanted to be like them and help others and be a mentor to others, or I was gonna go to seminary. And in that moment at the desk, I kid you not, this was my internal monologue. This sucks. I'm gonna be a pastor. So some of the positive affirmation came. So anyway, next week, we're gonna explore a little bit more of the different realms of vocation. They call it, in the article, the next section is called realms of responsibility. So we're gonna get into that a little bit, and I might have you all do something similar to what you just said Max is having to do, but not for your careers, but just a spiritual gifts inventory. Other weeks, we're going to, the book they quoted, The Listen God is Calling, I have that on my shelf, so we'll share some excerpts from that. And then, the next week, we're going to work on listening. There's something called centering prayer. I also have some stuff from Bonhoeffer on this topic. But it's hard to live your calling if you don't listen to what God is calling you to do. So we're gonna practice listening. The next one is going to be kind of coming back around to this post-Christendom, post-institutional thing. What does that mean? And then finally, we'll wrap up with, we'll just wrap up. But it's gonna be on Pentecost. I did not plan that. It just worked out like, oh, being called to do things by God on the last days on Pentecost.
It was by design.
That's right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I just keep thinking, I'm not gonna tie all this into the Trinity here, one of these